Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here. So today we're going to be doing something a little different, and that being talking about the company Koei and their random games that they've made that you would be surprised that they actually were involved with. So in other words, they're more off-the-wall type games, because, usually when people think of Koei, you usually think of either Dynasty Warriors and all those games, or you think of Romance of the Three Kingdoms and Nobunaga's Ambition and all those other strategy games. So just for fun, I wanted to briefly talk about some of the games that might have slipped under the radar that they've put out. And I will say right now that if you have been watching my channel long enough, you probably will recognize some of these games because I have done full-length reviews on them, so I won't go too much into detail about those. But in case you are interested and you do want to know more about them, then I do have videos on them, and you can check them out whenever you can. So with that said, let's talk about the games that Koei made that might surprise you. So the first one I want to mention here is actually a really old game, and that happens to be Dungeon. Yeah, just regular ass Dungeon, nothing more fancier than that. It happens to be a dungeon crawling RPG that was released in 1984, and it was released on the FM7 and the PC 8801. Now I'm sure some of you already know that Koei is no stranger to RPGs. They have done stuff like Enigma, Way of the Ninja, and then there was Uncharted Waters, which also do mix in some other stuff, mostly being their strategy type games mixed in with the RPG elements. But this one right here is actually a turn-based RPG that has a lot of dungeon crawling and even some open world elements. And in many ways, it also does kind of remind me of the wizardry games in the sense that you get to create your character and you get to pick like the different classes that they are. And apparently this game has a hunger meter, and if it runs out, then you actually die. So that's actually kind of interesting for an RPG to have something like that from back in the day. So that's all I really have to say about Dungeons, is that it seems like a very interesting old school RPG that is pre-Final Fantasy or pre-Dragon Quest. And I don't know, personally, I always found a lot of those really early RPGs to be quite fascinating to me. I don't know what it is, but anyways though, I just thought it was kinda cool that Koei made a game like this. So the next one I want to mention now is Stop That Roach on the Game Boy. So this is one game that I actually have reviewed on the channel, where pretty much it's a puzzle slash strategy game where you have to defend your cake from being eaten by these roaches. It's a decent pick up and play style game at the time. It's nothing mind blowing, but it is pretty weird looking given that the game is like super cartoony looking. Also, apparently this game was like very expensive. Even back when I reviewed it, it was. I can only imagine what it would be now, but anyways, so yeah, Koei made a game about a bunch of roaches. Isn't that weird? Although, wouldn't it be hilarious if they like recreated something like this into one of their warrior style games? So the next one I want to mention here is another one that I reviewed called Enigma on the PS1. And before you ask, unfortunately, it does not have any music from the band Enigma. Believe it or not, I actually started listening to them in the more recent years, and I actually really dig their stuff. But anyways though, this is an action-adventure game with tank controls and pre-rendered backgrounds. Yeah, kinda like Resident Evil, but only that it's not a horror game. But instead has the same themes as, let's say, Indiana Jones or Uncharted, where you have to look for artifacts in exotic locations. And I will say, the pre-rendered backgrounds in this game are very nice looking. I really love them a lot, and the music itself is great too. Of course, it doesn't sound like Enigma music, but it's still good. But as much as I did like the game though, it does have some problems that were pretty frustrating, mostly being the boss battles, but I've already talked about that before. But it is one that I would like to see get a fan translation, and I would like to replay it like that someday, but it probably wouldn't be a huge priority for me right away though. But I do think it would be pretty awesome if Koei ended up making another game like this, or even like a reboot or something. And the next one I want to mention is another one that I reviewed, and that happens to be Destrega, also on PS1. So this one actually did get released outside of Japan, and it happens to be a fighting game, and I find it's kind of similar to a Dragon Ball Z game because you get to run around on the field and start blasting each other with laser beams. And whenever you're too close to the enemy, then you get to use your melee attacks. So because of that aspect, it also does remind me of the game Evil Zone. So it's a pretty unique fighting game even for Koei standards, because the very first Dynasty Warrior game was indeed a fighting game, but that one seemed to play very similar to Soul Blade, where this one, like I said, is kind of its own thing. And I personally thought it was kind of enjoyable. Also, the voice acting in the game is just hilarious, as you would expect. And in a way, I am a little surprised that they never did make a sequel to this game. I guess it must have flopped really hard, but I don't know. I've seen a couple people say that this game was actually kind of underrated, so maybe it does have a cult fan base. And the next one is yet another PS1 game, and yes, I also did review it before, but it was a long ass time ago, and that happens to be Saiyuki Journey West. So this is a tactical strategy game very similar to Final Fantasy Tactics. In fact, if you look at it, yeah, it definitely does look like Final Fantasy Tactics. And I personally did enjoy this one quite a lot, mostly for the nice colorful graphics, the great music. In fact, the music of the final boss theme is creepy as fuck. And I really like the concept of having your party members transform into giant beast monsters. But yeah, as far as I know, I don't think they've ever really done like a tactical RPG like this before, because all their strategy games do not play anything like this at all. Like all those like Romance of Three Kingdoms, Nobunaga's Ambition, the Genghis Khan game, all those, yeah, they don't play anything like this. And next up we have is Fatal Inertia on the 360 and PS3. And if you can believe it, they made a racing game. And it plays pretty similar to Wipeout. But what took me by surprise the most about this game was that it was actually made by Koei's Canadian branch. Yeah, I never would have thought that Koei would ever have a company within my home country. Unfortunately, they didn't put out many games, but at least this one right here though, I can say was quite enjoyable. Although it has been a long time since I've played it, so I don't know how well it holds up, but I do remember enjoying my time with it though. But yeah, they actually did make a racing game, which I thought was really interesting. Now, wouldn't it be great if they can make one of those stupid horseback racing simulation games into a full-fledged racing game out of it? I would at least play that. And as for the next one I'm going to mention here, this one I know for a fact does have a pretty big cult fan base, and that happens to be Guitar Man. So this is a rhythm game on the PS2 and the PSP, and it's kind of like Guitar Hero, but without the guitar peripheral. So I really love the game's art style in here. It's very wacky and over the top, very bright and colorful, and the music is pretty great too. But I can tell you, as someone who is a fan of rhythm games, is that this game is pretty fucking hard. Like, even someone who actually used to play a lot on Expert on Guitar Hero and even that Hatsune Miku game, I still found this game to be pretty damn difficult. So it is one of those rhythm games that you really have to get on your A game as soon as possible. But yeah, it's quite fascinating that they made a rhythm game that was just so weird like this. It makes me wish that they can make another one. And next up is a game that is somewhat well known, and that happens to be Winback. So this game right here is a third-person shooter, and a lot of people seem to compare this game to Metal Gear, and all I have to say is that it does not play like Metal Gear. I think people just say that because of the fact that it just looks like an espionage type game, so they just assume Metal Gear, but no, it's actually a third-person shooter that mostly has a lot of duck and cover mechanics. It was actually one of the earliest games to utilize this, so pretty much, if you didn't have this game, then you wouldn't have your Gears of War. Which is why the game is somewhat well known, is mostly due to the fact that it's pretty well respected for making something that was pretty influential. And as far as I know, it's the only game that they ever made on the N64, though later on they eventually did do a PS2 version which had some cheesy voice acting, and there is even a sequel that was also on PS2 and the Xbox, but that one was created by the company Cavia. But as impressive as the game was though, unfortunately it seems to be forgotten over the years, but I know there are still some people that do remember it quite well, and I personally did like it for what it was. It is a little dated admittedly, but it's not bad. And the next one I'll mention is Nanatsu no Haiken, a horror game. I remember when I first discovered this game, my mind was completely blown that they made a horror game. So the first game was made on PC, Sega Saturn, and PS1. And it's in first person, and it seems to play more like the game D. So you go from different rooms and it takes you there automatically by pressing different directions, you read notes, and there's like also different traps you gotta avoid as well. But I really do like the way this game looks, but unfortunately I can't seem to play it well due to the fact that it hasn't been fan translated yet. But thankfully, there is a sequel, and that one actually has, and it was on the Sega Dreamcast. I also reviewed this one a little bit ago, although at the time that I reviewed it, it was not fan translated yet, so I actually kind of struggled on a couple parts, but eventually I did figure it out and beat it, and yeah, this one actually is more action orientated. And one feature that I was kind of impressed by was the fact that you can actually change the camera angle features that you want. So you can either play it as over the shoulder view, you can play it in first person view, or you can play it in a fixed camera angle view with tank controls and everything. So yeah, I won't say a whole lot about it here, given that I've done an entire video on it, but to sum it up though, I did like this game. I thought it was a pretty interesting horror game on the Dreamcast. So now, as the next one I want to talk about is a really weird one, and it has a name that I have a hard time pronouncing, and that happens to be Tamashii No Dante no Shinyuko Yori. So this right here is a PC98 game, and it happens to be an action platformer. Yeah, you don't get too many of those on PC98, let alone made by Koei of all people. So yeah, they did an action platformer, and the game is based after Dante's Divine Comedy. So in other words, it's like Dante's Inferno. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find a ROM of this game. I really do want to try it out for that. Not only does it seem really interesting and weird for a Koei game, but also that I really do love the way this game looks, although I guess that doesn't come as a surprise since I do love the way how most PC98 games look, but yeah, this one just has a really cool border around it. Also, it does kind of remind me a little bit of one of the Castlevania games on MSX. But hopefully one day I can get a hold of it though, because this is one game I think I could definitely review in the future and talk more about it. But for now though, I can say that it is a pretty fucking cool looking one, and also, could you imagine if they actually did a remake of this? Alright, so the final one that I want to talk about today, and yes, there is plenty more I could mention, so the last one I'm going to talk about here is also a pretty damn weird one, and that happens to be Dark Hunter. So if you thought the last one was weird, this is definitely the weirdest one that I could find. So of course, it's a PS1 game, and it's a visual novel, but get this though, it's an educational visual novel. Yeah, have you ever heard of those before? And what makes it even more interesting is that what it's an educational tool for is that it's supposed to try and teach Japanese people to speak English. Or if you already know English, then it could possibly help you out for teaching you Japanese. So pretty much, this is a game that does not need to be fan translated. It can be fully playable by anyone who can speak Japanese or English. Which is pretty damn strange, but I ain't complaining. That means I get to play this game. So yeah, there does indeed exist a visual novel that already has English text in it. Also does have English voice acting as well, but it's pretty bad though, as you would expect. But still, it could make for some amusing stuff. Also, I really do like the game's art style. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a TurboGrafx CD type game. But I should also mention that there is actually another game that is also like this that Koei also made, but it was called Emit, which also does look interesting as well, but I just wanted to talk about Dark Hunter because not only does it have a badass name, but also I actually really like the cover art a lot. It kind of reminds me of a Shin Megami Tensei type cover. But yeah, out of all the ones that I've seen, this is probably one of the weirdest ones that I discovered from them, and yet it's actually playable for anyone with Japanese or English, and it's also a learning game, so yeah, wow. So there we have it. Those are just some few examples of some oddball games that I discovered from Koei that are totally off the wall compared to what they normally do now. I know there is other games that they've published before, you know, stuff like Opuna on the Wii, Crimson Sea, and weirdly enough, in Europe, they actually published Persona 3 and Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner. But I don't think I really need to say much on those because those are pretty well known. But yeah, like I said, there's quite a number of them out there, but these are just a few examples of the weirdest ones that I could find. So yeah, do you guys know any other weird games that are made by companies that are, you know, well known for making a certain style of game? So let me know and let's talk about it. So with that said, thanks for watching, commenting, and have yourselves a great day.